Welcome back. Thank you for joining us today. Last week we heard a lot about the background of Lauren Pearson's life, but in this episode you will hear how she got married. She knew she was marrying a man who was becoming a minister, but the reality of what that looks like, being a new wife, and then being the wife of a minister, is a lot to work out. Not only that, she was once again taking the path of being second, and it kept playing out over and over in her life. But on the side and in the shadows, Lauren began to really create something. She really began to find her path in her career. You'll want to hear this. Stay with us. Hey, Lauren. Take me forward through marrying Andrew and a first church and a first experience as a minister's wife.
Yeah, that was a hard experience. So we got married in Charleston, South Carolina. And really, he said the way it works in the Episcopal Church is that if you went through a master's in divinity, a church or a diocese would basically sponsor you. So we were sponsored by the Diocese of South Carolina. And so we knew we would go back to South Carolina. And there were about 20 options in Charleston, one in Hilton Head, one in Beaufort, and one in Murrells Inlet, I think. And so I was just sure that we were going to move to Charleston. I already had it all mapped out. I was so excited. And that didn't happen. We got Beaufort. And I had actually only lived in a small town once before for a very short period of time. So I really didn't. That was the thing I was most nervous about, is like living in such a small community. It was a sweet community, and we still are very close with people in South Carolina, specifically Beaufort today. But it was hard. I mean, I think I was nervous about that. And then we got there. I couldn't take my job with me. So like I had a job that I loved. I had finally so I started working for the City Business Journals Network. And I was very quickly advancing. They asked me to move to San Francisco. I couldn't move there because I was engaged to be married. And so instead, I was moving to Beaufort, South Carolina, where unless you were a doctor, a lawyer, or independently wealthy, like there was just nothing for you to do, And so people would ask me to be their assistant. I was like, you don't know what you're asking. What a terrible mistake for you. You don't want that. Like, I can tell you that is something you don't want. So at the same time, Andrew we didn't have any children, and he was having a great experience. Like, everybody was just sort of like crowding around him and like, oh, wow, look at this new shiny minister that we have here. Is young and talented. And he was all of those things. Like, he really was young and exceptionally talented. So they were not wrong. It was just, I was having a hard time figuring out, because I was so close to sort of advancing in my own direction in my late 20s. And all of a sudden it was like back to square one. What are you going to do here? And there really weren't a lot of good solutions. So I took a few minutes and truly I Googled, because I knew I wanted to have kids at some point. And I said, best jobs for women who want to work and have babies and live in a small town. And financial advisor came up. Like, it was like the thing that came up. And I thought, oh, who wants to do that? I mean, I'm a journalism major. Like, nobody in their right mind would want to be a financial advisor. That's horrible. And I just remember like my dad coming home and like ripping open the statement and like huffing at it, stomping around and throwing it. Like, it just didn't feel like a great relationship from the very limited experience that I had. So, but I started talking to some friends who we'd made through the congregation who were in the industry, and they were like, Lauren, you would be so good at this. Like, this is just aligning people's values with their money. And that was an idea that I could get behind. And also, again, the pressure was not on, because no one even knew I existed there. I mean, it was not mean. It wasn't ugly. It was just that, like, no one... I think I didn't have expectations for being a preacher's wife And Andrew always started out in a place where there was a lot of administrative support. So I think a lot of ministers' wives have a different experience because they really do have the expectation that they're going to be leading the church in some way, or Bible studies, or all of that. I mean, I just wasn't asked to do those things, and there seemed to be plenty of support, and there really was plenty of support. So I felt the freedom to work there. And that's a congregation also with a lot of Northeastern influence, because a lot of people move from the Northeast to the coast of South Carolina. Either they moved to Florida and moved halfway back, or they just moved directly now to South Carolina. But that's kind of how it goes. So there was a lot of actually open-mindedness, I would say, on the coast, which was a neat thing.
But, I mean, it's so obvious. It's in our faces, and I'm sure you can track the trajectory of this. But once again, in getting married, you were about to get the career you really had hoped for and dreamed of and studied to be, and you chose to marry Andrew and be second, kind of be on the sidelines. And then you thought you were going to be in this town you loved, and you weren't. You went to this lovely, small, beautiful little town where you now have an office, right?
Yeah, I love it.
And you've kept an office there for all these years, one of 3 offices. But my point is, the thread of your life is that, you keep being in places where you're second or you're on the sidelines. You keep thriving. You keep making it work. But you accept it with grace. Like, you didn't seem to resent that you kept making choices that put you second.
Yeah, I really didn't. I think I did. I think the one thing I will say that I resented a little bit is that Andrew wasn't conscious of my feelings. Like, that's something we would have to work through later, is that, and I learned to communicate what I needed better, and then he did better too, but I think he was having such a lovely experience that he was truly oblivious to why I wasn't having the same experience, and he's a very nice man, but it was just completely a blind spot, I would say, for him.
And I want to go back to both of those things. One of the things I think we need to establish right here is Andrew has been a rock star in the Episcopal Church.
Yes.
And not in a little way. Like, he preached the gospel in a church where it wasn't really done that way. He brought it to life. He's a storyteller. And he was so young, taking on these congregations and moving around. But I do want to establish that Andrew's one of the kindest, sweetest, most compassionate men I've ever known, and a true rock star in the Episcopal Church.
Yes.
So that's one thing. And also that you took time, it took a while for you to even realize, oh, I'm not being seen. I'm not being heard.
Yes, that was an awakening. I mean, it was like, I would say it was like a 2-part awakening. The first one was, after a few years in Beaufort and just like all of a sudden being cast into these kind of like traditionally feminine Southern roles that, like, maybe for the first time I realized had a consciousness that they didn't fit me as well as maybe some other people that seem to do it effortlessly. Like my best friend in the world. I mean, she just like lives and breathes for it. She works at Somerset now too, but like I mean, she's just so good at it. I mean, I would watch her and wonder, is like, it just was part of the fabric of who she was. It didn't fit me as well. I think one thing I've reflected on, especially since we are so devoted to serving women at Somerset, is that some women need great nurturing and some need protection. And I think I'm a better protector than I am a nurturer. And that comes out, like, still in our practice today, but I think that when I think about our story and like fitting into these roles and really being a little confused about why I don't fit in, naturally, I've just come to know that about myself. But we were in Beaufort, South Carolina. That's where I became a financial advisor. I went to a very large, what we call wirehouse firm. And it was great because there was excellent training. I really learned. And then, of course, the whole market crashed at the same time. So like that, the School of Hard Knocks is a great school. I learned so many things all at once about what.
So this was 2008, 2009.
Yeah, it was tough. And so I promise I'm getting back to your question, but I think with Andrew and like really that kind of two-part awakening so I started establishing this business, this reputation, this brand underneath another large brand. And then Andrew says, well, I'm called to this position in Birmingham, Alabama. And that was really, really deep South to me. Like I'd never lived that far south for sure before. And it's a funny thing because when he said, we're moving to Beaufort, this is going back to like when we were both living in DC, I said, please don't you dare move me to Beaufort, South Carolina, and then Birmingham, Alabama. Like I said,
You had actually said that? And why those two towns? And why would you think that?
Because there were these tracks in the Episcopal Church, right? Like certain churches kind of pulled from other churches. And so truly, I can't believe that I said that back then and then it came true. But then I had such a strong, I feel like I've always felt so connected with the Lord that I was like, Lord, of course you're doing this to me because this is the thing that I said I didn't want. And clearly you're trying to teach me something very specific. It's just like that was really the extent of what I thought about it. But it was kind of right when I was getting traction in my career again. It all, I was going to have a disruption. But at that point, I knew more. I had 2 children at this point, and I knew that I would need more support. And so I said to Andrew, I was able to articulate, hey, I know when you move somewhere, it's like a wonderful experience for you and everybody is treating you like you're the most amazing thing that's ever walked through the door. I was like, that doesn't happen for me. So like now I have these babies and I'm going to be transitioning a business and I'm going to need more. So it really was my first time first looking inside, like figuring out what was going on and then being able to articulate that to my spouse. And I think if you're ever I don't know who would be in a position like this one, but if you are, I think it's really good to like go into yourself first and realize what's going on and then actually ask because, what I've learned is people aren't mind readers. And so you have to ask for what you need and then hope that,
absolutely,
someone that you're in a relationship with would respond well to that.
Those are really amazing tools for anybody to take in a marriage or in a relationship. And it's just so hard early in life, I think, to learn those kinds of communication skills, especially as Southern women, we are such pleasers.
Yes.
And we kind of take in what's expected of us rather than giving out what we need on the other side of it. But I want to jump forward into Birmingham, and you've done a great job as we've talked. I have a way, a little earlier than you in my life. I came to Birmingham at about 24, 25, and I had never lived in the Deep South. I was coming from Central Florida via New York and then back. And you have this wonderful way of defining what that community looks like, feels like when you enter it the way you did. And as you said, you entered it again in the backseat.
Yes.
You entered it again on the sidelines. And Andrew entered Birmingham, Alabama as an absolute, lay out the red carpet rock star. And you were also going to the Cathedral Church of the Advent, the largest Episcopal church in the Alabama diocese, right? And the wealthiest church in the Alabama diocese. So there's something to be said about that community.
I have a funny story that I can start with because every time I move somewhere, when you learn, what I was good at was moving. I mean, which was great for Andrew because I'd been doing it since I was a little girl. So I knew that in order to be happy in a new place, that I would be the one that the responsibility would come on and fall on me to make the best of it and to really create relationships because everyone else, for the most part, already had established relationships. And there would be some negotiations in that, like, you would have to, like, learn to assimilate in some way, shape, or form. Or that was my tactic, at least. So, but I do remember we were interviewed, but we were really far along. Like, we were definitely coming. And so then I start to come along to the interviews, too, because it's the only job, I think, where the wife interviews, too. You know, every single place we've been, I also interviewed, unfortunately for Andrew, really, truly. And so I remember coming from Beaufort, which is 95 degrees. It feels like most of the time. People wear resort wear all year long. You know, I mean, it's like, it's just hot. There's a bunch of Lily Pulitzer. It's just the way of the way of the place. And I remember it was right after Labor Day, and I was coming. And so, of course, it was even 95 degrees in Alabama. But I was in like full Lily Pulitzer garb, and I roll up and everybody is in like navy, mauve, black. And I'm sitting here. I mean, I stick out like a sore thumb, and I'm going to this luncheon at the country club with all the women. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is different. Like, I'm going to really need to put in the work here. You know, it's like, anyway, it was just a funny story because I felt like I was naked. I was not naked, but I really did may as well have been. I knew from the beginning that I would have to make some effort there. And then when we moved there, of course, I'd had the conversation with Andrew. And he actually was like so open to making sure that that my needs were met with these two small babies and, you know, all of these things. And he was really great about that. So we moved to Birmingham, and I moved with the large financial firm. So like they just moved me to the office there. And so again, when you're new to a place, you're just kind of studying it, right? Like I'm like, no more resort wear, Lauren. That's not going to work. But second note, I'm in my office like day 2, and I'm sitting around, and it is a much larger office than my one in Beaufort. And in Beaufort, there were like 4 women and 1 man. And I go in this office, and there are like 60 men and 2 women. I mean, truly, there was no one else. And I was thinking, this is going to be the best. I am going to work with every woman in Alabama. It's going to be so good. You know, like I really was so optimistic for the future, which really, truly, when I look back upon reflection, I should be, because now we serve primarily women and families, and it works out great.
But it was a crooked way to get there, and you had the right vision. It just wasn't easy.
It was not easy. And so I was there. I was thinking, oh, this is so great. And I mean, I would meet with women, no. And meanwhile, I was still getting referrals, which this was a surprise to me in my practice. And we've always focused on complex planning, being highly relational, thinking differently, active investment management. So I knew it was important to be comprehensive because I learned that during the financial crisis. Like, you really have to be communicative, and what we say is actually comprehensive, which is kind of a silly thing to say, but everybody says they're comprehensive in our industry, but we were committed to actually being so. And so, or I was since the beginning. So I was still getting referrals from South Carolina, and that was kind of bewildering to me, but that's what really kept my business going. And I was able to complete my CFP because I had time, right? I had all these clients in South Carolina, and then a business that I was growing in Alabama, but no Alabama clients at all. And so after like 2 years, I went to my area director. I can't remember what they call it, complex director. And I said, Dave, this isn't working for me. Like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here, but like, I can't seem to get anyone to talk to me here. And I think that I'm hitting all the marks, and I'm a professional, and now I'm a CFP, and I've been working for a very long time at this point in this job and I keep getting referrals, which means I must not be terrible at it. And he said, I have something that I have to tell you. And that is that you did not go to Mountain Brook High School. And so you are going to struggle here. And I'm like, well, I am a slow study and I am just now figuring this out. You know, I mean, it was really kind of like that. And he said, what you need to do is you need to go to, and this was fabulous advice. He said, you need to go to attorneys and CPAs and explain to them what you do. And that's going to go a whole lot better for you because they're going to see your professional credentials and they're going to understand that what you're offering is a differentiated approach. And that's going to work out for you. And he was right. And it really did. I changed my whole strategy. And what happened, which was, I think I didn't even realize this at the time, is they all started coming on as clients. So they're like, well, yes, I mean, I'm happy to refer business to you, but I have also been looking for this kind of work for my family. And would you consider, you know, taking my wife and I on, or husband or whatever it was?
Still not
So
working.
instead of going to the kind of deep-seated blue blood community of Birmingham, which was your church community
Yes.
also,
Yes.
you were going to a segment that might not have always grown up and gone to Mountain Brook High School and might have come from other areas. But, you know, there's something I want to note right here in your story because I think it's an important part for later. So Andrew was going into this big church and probably for the first time, and I don't know the numbers of your life, but he was probably making a really nice salary.
Yes.
You had 2 little babies and your salary wasn't needed at that point to support your life. Is that correct?
Right. That my job was like the fun job. Again, it was sort of like everything else about it. Like, it was just, I enjoyed it. I knew I probably wasn't a great fit to be a stay-at-home mom because I've had this like active, busy mind that I needed to use for the greater good. I would notice on maternity leave when my house started looking like the Louvre and I started like focusing on things that weren't important, that I was like, okay, this doesn't work for me. Like, I've got to start focusing in a different direction. You know, I'd be like, why did this person say so-and-so? And then I would just kind of wake up like, Lauren, you never care about stuff like that. What are you talking about? You know? So anyway, I knew it was time that I needed a job. So that's what.
Well, and I'll just give you one little personal segue. I'll never forget the day my late husband, James, came home and he said, I met the most fabulous woman today. She's the wife of Andrew Pearson at the Church of the Advent. She's trying to build, a clientele in the wealth management space. And at that time you were pregnant with your 3rd child.
Yes.
And he said, she's pregnant. You know, this is going to be so hard. I don't know if she can do it, but you're going to love her.
He did. I remember that you were
He was your flag waver. He just believed in you from the get-go.
He was the best. And I remember our first meeting because it was the first professional woman meeting I had. You know, like, I was like, oh, this is so special. Like, I'm going to have I didn't know what to expect, but I had great expectations and they've all been met. So anyway, that's so fun. I appreciate him advocating for me because
he absolutely did advocate for you and then created this fabulous friendship. And now you take care of me and my children and plan and help us, and so grateful. So Lauren, here you are, pregnant with your 3rd child. Andrew is just creating big waves. He, I used to hear the stories of how many people would show up, at the Advent for services who had never been churchgoers before just to hear him preach. He was making such a difference in the Episcopal and greater community, actually. I think he was pulling in people from lots of other places because he was such a powerful preacher.
Yes.
So he's this, not even rising, he is this rock star community. You have access to any and everything kind of in the Birmingham community because you're at the top of the food chain in one of the wealthiest churches, that sort of thing. And you're still sort of over here just doing your thing, just quietly kind of doing your thing because you want to work and you have this sense of service to the world through wealth management, right?
Yeah, it's a few things. One, I realized early on, since I wasn't being asked to like lead Bible studies and I had been a young life leader, that like my ministry was going to look a little differently, different than what I'd maybe thought the expectations would be. And money is super intimate for people. I mean, it's just like
Absolutely.
sometimes people put a lot of their identity into the money that they make, or, often how they spend is a reflection of some of their value set. Not always, but sometimes. And so it really became that like, okay, whatever this is that's being built is really my way to serve other people. And that's what I was super passionate about, basically from the beginning. Like that, even though I didn't have a vision for a big business at the time, because I always just thought, oh, this is Mr. and Mrs. Smith and we love them and this is what's important to them. I was never kind of connecting the dots. And I never really knew that I wanted to be a business owner. It wasn't a goal from childhood. I'd watched my dad work for a big company, and I don't know. I just didn't have that entrepreneurial, blood work at the time. I don't know how to say that, but it just wasn't in my DNA. So I thought. And so, but once Andrew, so he started out as an associate minister at the Advent and then became the dean of the Advent. And deans typically have like a pretty long history at the Advent. And so because he was so young, I mean, I think he might have even been the youngest or among the youngest of the deans that had ever been asked to, or called to be the dean. Then I just had a better sense for the fact that we were really going to establish roots in Birmingham, and even before this was another one that, got as funny with me. It's like Andrew and I basically just decided, hey, come what may, we're going to raise our kids in Birmingham. Like this is what we don't want to move around like my childhood. We want them to have a place to call home. And so we're going to do that. And so then I felt more freedom. I was at this very large firm who wasn't taking fiduciary responsibility all the time for their clients because they didn't have to. And because I was a CFP, I wanted to. And being a fiduciary means I'm going to put my client's interests ahead of my own all the time. That's the definition. And I really wanted that. That was the kind of relationship I already had with my clients. And so I wanted to be in an environment that was a little more stable in that way, and that I could practice what in my mind's eye was the most responsible way.
And let me just stop you right there, because what I hear you saying is that wealth management and care for the people whose money you managed became your ministry.
Yes, that was
you
Absolutely it.
Yeah. So just quietly and silently and on the side, like you've always done, you were building this business that you operated emotionally and certainly from a value perspective, intellectually, as a ministry. I mean, that's how you take care of people in the most unlikely of ways. I've never heard it approached this way before. Stunningly beautiful, I might add. So take me from Andrew's doing his thing, and it's huge, and you leave the firm you were with because why?
It got to the point they had been acquired by a bank, and the banking culture was really starting to seep in. It had already been there, but it got to the point, and this is still my litmus test for working with a back office or a firm, because you need a lot of support. It's a compliance heavy industry. But at the time, I was being asked, I remember one time they said, oh, you need to sell 50 credit cards. I'm like, well, I have 40 clients, so that's going to be hard, right? Like that math isn't going to work out. And so, I felt like I was at the point where I was being asked to either be a subpar advisor or a bad employee, right? Like that was the choice if I was really boiling it down to what I saw. And so I needed to be in an environment where there wasn't the noise of some of the initiatives coming from corporate headquarters, whatever that might be. And so I really was, but the problem I had is that, there were two kind of camps in wealth management. This is an overgeneralization, but there were kind of two camps. There was the large wirehouse that had a lot of scale and sophistication from an investment standpoint. And then there was the registered investment advisory space where there's a lot of people practicing in a fiduciary capacity. So what I was looking to do is really marry the scale and sophistication of a wirehouse firm with the responsibility of a small firm. And so that was my idea. So I just started interviewing everyone. I mean, I would call firms on the West Coast. I would just to say, like, where are the trends? Like, what am I not seeing that I need to see? And there was an emerging set of firms that were really looking to do what I was looking to do, which is move advisors from this wirehouse environment into a fiduciary environment with the scale and support that they needed in order to operate efficiently. And so that's where I found Hightower as a back office. And they really liked firms having their own brand, their own established identity at the time. This was 2016. So the problem was that they wanted very large, fancy teams. And remember, mine was the fun job. And so I didn't have $1 billion book of business at the time. I mean, it just was not even on my radar. So I had to basically beg to get on the platform. And they said, well, you can be part of this other team. And it was a bunch of guys, and they were great. And so I joined. That's like how I got into the Hightower network, which is the firm, my back office firm that really supports marketing, compliance, all of the things that would take me away from working with clients, which is what I loved to do. So, I would argue that firms really need that kind of support. It's hard without it because you're spending all of your time being, a compliance officer rather than being an advisor. And it was important to me that I was an advisor. So I started with that. I left the large firm and went to Hightower's back office with this team. And it was a carefully vetted process. But even then I still wanted to support, right? Like that's kind of always the role I've been in, is a support to it. I was ready to wave whatever flag that was, but it was really a cultural misfit. Like the way that I took care of clients was so different. And as soon as I moved to this registered investment advisory space, it felt like the business then took off. And, we'd been in Birmingham for 5 years, and I don't know if it was just the right time. Then I was more established. People knew what kind of work I did. Even people that were, church people were coming to me now and saying, like, I would like to engage with you. And that didn't happen at first. And I was not big into, really propositioning people from the church. Obviously, that felt like a strong conflict.
Let me ask you 2 questions right here, something we haven't talked about. So you'd been in Birmingham 5 years. Andrew's just slaying it at the church.
Yes.
And you slowly are shifting into something where the way you work, the way you cared for people in your work aligned with how you could work in moving into a much smaller environment, right?
Yes.
But did you ever feel in those 5 years that you had pushback from the church and that you were not the typical minister's wife, that you were doing things your own way, you had your own career, you couldn't make every luncheon, you couldn't make every Bible study,
I never felt that. And I don't know if it's just because the South is so, especially the Deep South, is so polite. Like maybe the expectation was that I would, but no one told me. And, now I joke with my business partner, Emily, because she is from Montgomery. And so she knows how to read every room. And I still sometimes am at a loss, so it's like it's a good partnership because sometimes I know there's other things under the surface, but she has to interpret for me because I really don't get it. I mean, it's some people might be like, how are you so dense? But I really am. I don't know what else to say. I just miss it. And so I think that was probably, I don't even want to say, there's just no way for me to know if that was an expectation that was missing, but no one ever said anything, So I just figured, well, I guess I'm doing fine. And I just kept going along with my work. Now, it was hard to make friends at first because people would invite me to play dates at 9:30 in the morning. And I couldn't do that, And so there's another funny story that I met these women at a 30-somethings thing, and I had not met any women that worked up to that point. And I met these two women, and you're like, oh, I'm so-and-so, and I'm so-and-so. And I didn't know which name was which, but they said, we run on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 6 a.m. I was like, I love to run. I don't love to run. That's a big lie. So their minister's wife is lying to them because I just needed a friend that also might not ask me to play date at 9:30. Maybe we could do something outside of that time. So my friend called me from South Carolina. She said, how's it going? I said, well, I'm literally chasing my friends down the street Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm not a runner, but it was the only chance I had of meaningful, female connection of women that had babies and worked. And so anyway, I learned to be an okay runner, and they were very gracious with me and were great friends. So that's a funny story. So I do think that there were some cultural barriers to connection that I was just, again, I just said oh, wow, that I'm not going to be able to do that. And just kept moving forward, I guess.
And just one other question in this time period in your life. So, you were so thoughtful considering how to move from where you were in this bigger firm to something that you felt aligned with the way you wanted to care for people in the wealth management space. And you would, you're doing all this during the day, and then you get home at night and there's a church dinner, there's a service you have to go to. You've got 3 little girls. Where was Andrew in, acknowledgement or involvement in your career?
It was sort of he was always very supportive. So I think that that's one thing, is that he was supportive. I think he actually has a more nurturing side too. And so he really wanted to be very involved with the kids when they were little. I mean, it was very, very important to him that he was a great dad. And so he actually did all of that very well. I mean, he was always, if I had a meeting, then he would step in. I mean, it was very much like a co-parenting relationship. When the kids were younger, there were a lot of things that I couldn't go to, right? Like if he had a church function at night and we have 3 little kids, sometimes I got to go, but sometimes I just didn't get to go. And I think that was fine. In some ways it was shielding me because I did have these children that needed my help. And actually also my dad was very sick at the time too. So it was a lot of things happening at once.
What year did you move into Hightower and then become Somerset? What year was
So that was 2018.
That's what I thought. Okay, 2018. So in 2018, you were with Hightower, which then morphed into what is now your wholly owned firm, right?
Right. And that was, I think that moment for me was big because I had been, agreed to start on this team, and it was an all-male team. And, I was really trying to be a great team player. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh, you're not a team player. You're not this. And so there were these people giving me these words that I didn't know how to process about myself. But again, I guess I'm pretty open to feedback. And I was like, wow, that's so weird because I'm trying so hard. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually ended up seeing a corporate psychologist at the time saying what is this blind spot that I have here? What is this about me that's not working? Because I spent so much time trying to find, the perfect situation and did so much research. I was always very good at research from my early days at working. And And she just said, hey, listen, like you're in an environment that you are not going to be able to change. And so you need to figure out what your parameters are. And you need to stick to those parameters and, what is most important to you. So I went through the work of really saying, okay, this environment doesn't seem like it's fitting, and finding my voice. I think that actually is the first time that I found my voice, is to say, okay, I am growing. I'm supporting this other team well through, integrating these clients and doing a great job, I think, or trying to do a great job as an advisor, creating meaningful, relationships, really, making sure that I'm representing your firm well, and it doesn't seem to be enough. Why is that? And really what I landed on is that I needed more administrative support in the Birmingham office, and they were not willing to do that. And so then I went to Hightower Corporate and was prepared at the time to say, hey, listen, I'm not trying to change this team. I realize I'm kind of the mosquito in the sleeping bag here. I am happy to leave, but I just need to know that that's what's happening, is that like I will not be functioning in this way anymore because it's not working. I mean, it just isn't. And I wasn't, overly upset about it. It just was what it was. And so, I mean, it was upsetting, right, to make a bad decision. Like that's always upsetting when you make a bad choice. But Hightower, I will give it to them. They said, no, like, let's set you up on your own. So like for the first time, I was almost like an accidental business owner. But I think the combination of standing up for myself for the first time and really like finding my voice and being able to say, what could this be, right? Like now I have this situation where, again, no one's really looking or caring what I'm doing. Because again, I'm this little small fish over here. And so it's really, yeah. So for the first time, what I got to do was create in a meaningful way, in a way that felt authentic to me, and that I didn't realize how much joy would come from that. And it did. I mean, it was like a very joyful time. And I remember you being a part of it. And I came with all of a sudden it was like I had a gajillion ideas. I was like, this is how this should be done. I've seen a lot of the industry now. It's like I've been in here over 10 years. Now I know exactly how I want to do things. And you were so smart in saying to me, okay, pick 3. Like you have 3 little kids. You support a husband in a big job. Like you pick 3 areas to focus on over the next 5 years. And I did just that. I mean, and it was like exactly what I needed to hear.
Those were fun days. I wish we could go back to the whiteboard,
Me too.
just you and me in a room and you blue skying. But I also remember the angst of that time. I remember, your office was 2 minutes from my office walking. And I remember walking in and, you just were so fraught, not distraught, but fraught with, can I break away from this male-dominated firm? Once again, I'm in a place where I'm not doing it the way I vision it, and I can't make it fit. But do I have what it takes to go over here and really do it on my own? And I just remember you standing there, and we were talking about it, and I didn't know enough about your business to give you great guidance there. I was excited for you because I'm so entrepreneurially wired. I'm like, go for it, and you've got the strength, and you're so smart, and you're so everything, On the other side, I was like, Teresa, shut up. She might not. I don't know, But I do remember that you spent a fair amount of time just really going, I don't know, can I not? Those were some sleepless nights. I do remember that, but I also remember you're right when you say there was such joy in creating. And for the first time, 10 years in this business, always being kind of, the round peg in the square, box, because you had this vision for wealth management that was completely different than the way you had to operate in the corporate places you'd been in. And, I just remember meeting with you just a couple of times, and you were there was energy bouncing off the walls, and you did have such joy. And I hope other women can hear this who want to be entrepreneurs, who want to open their own businesses, who are coming out of situations when they're not quite sure they can do it, and hear that once you made that step, it was like it all opened up for you.
It did. It was like I shed a skin and I all of a sudden could be myself. Like I didn't feel the need to assimilate anymore, at least professionally, because I'd already tried and that was a failure. I mean, it was like I couldn't figure out how to do it the way that the industry had always said that I should. And so then I just said, well, we're just going to do it this way now. And like, again, there was very little. My husband was the stable at the time, his job was the stability. Like I didn't feel, and I do feel like this is a lucky break for me, is that like I didn't have the pressures that a lot of people feel, that so much is riding on the making or breaking of the decisions that they make as an entrepreneur. I mean, people need to be very, very careful with their mental health when they're on an entrepreneurial journey, because like I only imagine, because I felt it later, like how unstable it feels when it's all on you. I never had that, like I was never the personal CFO of my family, even though I did that work for other people, I didn't feel that pressure, at least not at that point.
Thank you, Lauren. Let's take a break right there. Thank you for being with us today. You've heard how Lauren's life evolved from Beaufort, South Carolina, moving to Birmingham, her husband really becoming a rock star in the Episcopal Church, and her career beginning to take off. But you need to stay tuned for next week, because you'll hear how Lauren and Andrew's lives just got turned absolutely upside down. Thank you again for being with us today.